When the land he called home becomes the target of an invisible threat, a deaf man and his loyal dog defy a powerful empire, not knowing the real battle is yet to come. The sun rose lazily over the Montana mountains when James Anderson opened his eyes. Duke, his loyal German shepherd, was already alert at the foot of the bed, watching him with those amber eyes that seemed to read his soul. James smiled and reached out to stroke the dog's dense fur. It was like this every morning, a silent ritual between two beings who understood each other beyond words. At 50, James carried on his face the marks of time and experience. Deaf since the age of 5, when a high fever robbed him of his ability to hear, he had learned to navigate the world in a unique way. His eyes captured details that went unnoticed by most people. His hands, calloused from work, felt the vibrations of the world around him with impressive precision. The wooden cabin where he lived was away from the city, surrounded by the lush nature of the mountainous region. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, but James felt only the gentle vibration, a constant reminder of the solidity of his home. "Come on, Duke. Time for work." The words left his mouth a little differently, with the cadence of someone who can't hear their own voice. But Duke understood the command perfectly. Man and dog walked to the old pickup truck parked next to the house. The vehicle, like its owner, carried stories in the rusty metal and worn seats, but still functioned with the precision of a well-maintained machine. James's job was simple: to serve as a private driver for Richard Palmer, an influential businessman in the region. There was an unspoken irony in the fact that a deaf man was a driver, but James compensated for his auditory limitation with extraordinary visual attention and sharp reflexes. That morning, his destination would take him to an important meeting. In Helena, Richard Palmer was waiting for him at the entrance of his mansion, a stark contrast to James's modest cabin. The businessman, impeccably dressed in his Italian suit, waved impatiently when he saw the pickup approach. "You're late." "Anderson," said Palmer, getting into the vehicle. James didn't hear the complaint, but noticed his employer's closed expression in the rearview mirror. He nodded respectfully and started the car. The tension in the air was palpable, different from other mornings. There was something in Palmer's gaze that made James uneasy, a shadow that wasn't there before. The journey to Helena would take about 2 hours. James kept his eyes fixed on the road, occasionally checking on his boss in the rearview mirror. Palmer seemed absorbed in his cell phone, typing furiously. Suddenly, he looked up and met James's eyes in the mirror. A shiver ran down the driver's spine. "Anderson, I need to discuss something with you," said Palmer, gesturing for James to pay attention to his lips. James nodded, keeping one eye on the road and the other on his boss. "I have a proposal for you. I'm interested in buying your property." James's heart raced. His land, the only piece of the world that truly belonged to him, was now the object of interest of a man who owned almost everything in the region. He didn't respond immediately, letting silence, his life companion, speak for him. "I'll pay a generous amount," continued Palmer, a calculating gleam in his eyes. "More than it's worth on the market. Much more." James looked back at the road. The offer would be tempting to anyone in his financial situation, but something inside him stirred. The land wasn't just a material possession, it was his identity, his refuge, the place where his silence made sense. Upon reaching Helena, James parked in front of the building where the meeting would be held. Before getting out, Palmer placed his hand on the driver's shoulder. "Think about my offer, Anderson. An opportunity like this doesn't come twice in a lifetime." The words read on the businessman's lips weighed like lead in James's heart. As he watched Palmer enter the building, an uncomfortable feeling settled in his chest. It wasn't just their business offer. There was something more, something that his eyes, trained to observe the invisible, could perceive. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. During the return home, James couldn't push away thoughts about Palmer's proposal. The sun was already beginning to set when he finally arrived at his cabin. Duke greeted him with the usual excitement, running in circles around him. James knelt and hugged the dog, finding comfort in the animal's unconditional loyalty. "What do you think, buddy?" asked James. knowing Duke couldn't answer, but finding in the ritual of sharing his thoughts a way to organize them. As he prepared a simple coffee in the wooden kitchen, James contemplated the mountain horizon through the window. The view always brought him peace. It was there, on that piece of land, that he felt complete. How could he put a price on that? The next morning, James drove again to Palmer's mansion. The businessman invited him in, something unusual that immediately put James on alert. The living room was imposing, with imported furniture and artwork on the walls. Palmer indicated a leather sofa for James to sit on. "Anderson, I'll be direct," said Palmer, making sure James could read his lips. "I want your property, and I'm willing to pay 5 times the market value." James's eyes widened. It was an absurd amount, enough to buy a comfortable house in the city and still have a good reserve. But why? Why so much interest in his piece of land? "Mr. Palmer, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in selling," replied James, his voice carrying the peculiar cadence of someone who can't hear their own sound. Palmer's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression James had seen before, in people who weren't used to receiving no as an answer. "Think carefully, Anderson. With that money, you could have a more comfortable life, advanced medical treatments, maybe even recover part of your hearing." The mention of his deafness as something to be fixed made James's blood boil, but he kept his composure. His condition had never been a problem for him. It was part of who he was. "My answer is still no," he replied firmly. Palmer rose abruptly, frustration evident in every line of his face. "You're making a mistake, Anderson. Nobody refuses an offer like this, nobody." The words carried a weight that went beyond commercial negotiation. It was a veiled threat, and James caught it perfectly. He stood up as well, feeling that the conversation was over. "I have to go. Now, Mr. Palmer, can I come back later to take you to the 3 p.m. meeting?" Palmer made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "That won't be necessary. I'll find another driver for today. You can take the day off." James left the mansion with a heavy heart. While driving back home, he noticed a black car that seemed to be following him at a distance. His survival instinct, sharpened by years of silence and observation, kept him alert. Arriving home, he found Duke agitated, barking toward the road. James stroked the dog's head, trying to calm him, but he knew that Duke's keen senses were picking up something that escaped even his own heightened perception. That night, James couldn't sleep properly. He tossed and turned in bed, restless, while Duke remained vigilant by his side. Why so much interest in his land? What did Palmer really want? The next morning, James decided to investigate. He knew every inch of his property, but maybe there was something he had never noticed. He walked with Duke through the fields surrounding the cabin, observing carefully. It was then that he noticed something strange. In the lower part of the land, where a small stream cut through his property, there were recent marks. Someone had been there taking measurements or samples. James knelt, examining the marks in the damp soil. Duke suddenly barked, alerting him to someone's presence. James rose quickly and saw a man in a suit, clearly uncomfortable in the rural environment, standing near the fence that marked the boundary of his property. "Can I help you?" asked James, approaching cautiously. The man seemed surprised at being discovered. He quickly composed himself and extended a card. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson. I'm Nathan Wells, a geologist hired by RP Enterprises." James took the card, noting that RP were the initials of Richard Palmer's company. The geologist continued talking, apparently not noticing that James depended on lip reading. "Preliminary analyses show promising results. You have a real gem here." James made a gesture, interrupting the man. "I'm deaf. I need to see your lips to understand." Nathan looked embarrassed. He adjusted his position and continued, now speaking more slowly and facing James. "As I was saying, we're doing a survey for Mr. Palmer. This region has potential for—" He hesitated, as if he had said too much. "Just a routine analysis," he concluded hastily. "Have a good day." The man walked away quickly, leaving James with more questions than answers. Looking at the card in his hand, and then at the marks near the stream, a suspicion began to form in his mind. What was on his land that sparked so much interest? And how far would Palmer go to get it? James decided he needed to better understand what was happening. The next day he took his pickup and drove to town. His first destination was the municipal library, where Mrs. Margaret, the librarian he'd known for years, greeted him with a warm smile. Using paper and pen, James explained what he needed: information about natural resources in the region, especially related to water. Mrs. Margaret, who had learned some basic signs to communicate with James, nodded understandingly and guided him to a section with books and documents on regional geology. While James was browsing the materials, the librarian returned with a local newspaper from a few weeks ago. "I think this might interest you," she wrote on a piece of paper, pointing to an article on the 3rd page. The title of the report jumped out at James: RP Enterprises announces investments in bottling mineral water. The article mentioned that Richard Palmer was buying properties in the region to expand his businesses into the bottled mineral water sector, taking advantage of the purity of local underground sources. A piece of the puzzle fell into place. James continued researching and found a geological map indicating the presence of a large aquifer exactly in the region where his property was located. James's hands trembled as he held the map. That was it. His land wasn't just a piece of rural ground. It housed a valuable source of pure mineral water. Upon leaving the library, James felt the weight of the discovery. It wasn't just his home at stake, but a precious natural resource that Palmer wanted to exploit. On the way back, he decided to stop at the only law office in the small town. Dr. Michael Roberts was a middle-aged lawyer known for defending environmental causes. James entered the simple office and, using paper and pen, explained his situation. The lawyer listened attentively and then responded, articulating well so James could read his lips. "Mr. Anderson, what's happening is more common than you might think. Businessmen like Palmer discover valuable resources on rural properties and try to buy the land for values that seem generous, but are a fraction of what they'll really be worth after exploitation." James nodded, feeling a mixture of relief at understanding the situation and concern about what might happen. "What can I do?" he asked. "Legally, the land is yours and no one can force you to sell, but people with Palmer's power don't always play by the rules." The lawyer's words confirmed James's fears. Dr. Roberts promised to help him and suggested that he document any suspicious action by Palmer or his men. When returning home late in the afternoon, James immediately noticed that something was wrong. Duke didn't come to meet him as he always did. With a racing heart, James ran into the cabin, calling for his companion. He found Duke in the kitchen, trembling and visibly agitated. The dog seemed more relieved to see James, but his behavior indicated that something had frightened him. James examined the environment carefully and noticed subtle signs that someone had been there. A drawer not completely closed, some papers out of place. Duke guided James to the back of the house where the fence had been cut. Someone had invaded his property while he was away. A clear message that Palmer wouldn't give up easily. That night, sitting on the porch with Duke by his side, James contemplated his options. Selling the land would mean giving up not only his home but also his dignity. Accepting the intimidation would be allowing men like Palmer to continue acting with impunity. No, he wouldn't yield, but he would need help. The next morning, James received an unexpected visit. Sarah Thompson, a young teacher from the local school, knocked on his door. She knew sign language, having a deaf brother, and conversed fluently with James. "I heard about the situation with Palmer," she signed. "It's not the first time he's done this." James invited her in, and with the help of sign language, the conversation flowed naturally. Sarah explained that her father, a small farmer, had also been pressured to sell his lands years ago. The difference was that he had given in, believing in promises of a better life, only to find that the money didn't make up for what he had lost. "There's a group in town of people concerned about Palmer's actions," continued Sarah. "We're documenting his abuses and trying to mobilize the community." Sarah's visit lit a small flame of hope in James's heart. Perhaps he wasn't alone in this fight. "Why are you helping me?" asked James, distrust still present after years of isolation. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "Because if we don't unite against people like Palmer, they'll continue destroying everything they touch. And your land, there's something special about it, isn't there?" James nodded slowly, realizing that Sarah already knew about the water. He hesitated for a moment, but then made a decision. He took Sarah to the stream, showing her where the geologist had done his analyses. "This isn't just an ordinary stream," signed James. "There's a source of pure mineral water under these lands. That's why Palmer is so interested." Sarah's eyes widened at the revelation. The discovery not only confirmed her suspicions, but elevated the importance of James's resistance to a new level. It wasn't just a fight for his land. It was a battle for the protection of a precious natural resource that, in the wrong hands, could be exploited without consideration for the environment or the local community. In the following weeks, the tension increased considerably. James was dismissed from his job as a driver, a clear retaliation for his refusal to sell the property. The loss of employment didn't surprise him, but it meant that his financial reserves would begin to diminish rapidly. Still, his determination remained unwavering. Sarah kept her promise, mobilizing a small group of local residents who shared similar concerns about Palmer's business practices. On a Saturday afternoon, James's cabin, normally quiet, was transformed into a busy meeting point. Among those present was old Joe, an elderly man who had lost his farm to Palmer 5 years earlier. Mary Williams, owner of a small grocery store threatened by the new supermarket built by Palmer. And Tyler Green, a young environmentalist who studied the impact of Palmer's companies on the local ecosystem. Sarah served as an interpreter, translating the conversation into sign language for James. Duke circulated among the guests, sniffing them cautiously, as if assessing their intentions. "It's not just about James's land," explained Tyler, opening a map on the rustic kitchen table. "Look at this. The properties Palmer has acquired in recent years form practically a circle around the main aquifer. James's land is literally the missing piece of the puzzle." Everyone leaned in to see the map, where red dots indicated properties already acquired by the businessman. James's small property, marked in blue, was like an island surrounded by enemy territories. "If he gets my land," signed James with Sarah translating, "he'll have complete control over the aquifer. And then what will happen to the region's water?" "Exactly," agreed Tyler. "Our research indicates that massive extraction of mineral water could drastically affect groundwater levels throughout the region. The wells of neighboring properties could dry up. The vegetation would be affected." Mary, the grocery store owner, stood up with indignation. "Wasn't it enough for him to monopolize commerce? Now he wants to control even the water we drink?" The meeting continued for hours, with stories being shared and strategies discussed. By the end, it was clear that James's fight was no longer solitary. A small but determined resistance had formed. The first step would be to document and disclose what was happening. Tyler, with his environmental knowledge, committed to preparing a report on the potential impacts of aquifer exploitation. Sarah would use her contacts at the school to raise awareness among more people. Mary offered her grocery store as an information point for the community. As the group said goodbye, old Joe, who had remained silent during most of the meeting, approached James. "Be careful, son," he said, his tired eyes carrying the weight of someone who had faced and lost the same battle. "Palmer isn't a man to give up easily. He'll try everything." James nodded, perfectly understanding the old man's warning. Night fell over the property, and he remained on the porch with Duke, watching the stars and reflecting on the day's events. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The next day, James decided to visit the spring on his property. He walked with Duke through the familiar fields until he reached the point where the small stream emerged from the earth. It was a peaceful place, surrounded by lush vegetation. James had always appreciated the peace of that location, but now he saw it with new eyes. Kneeling, he touched the crystalline water that sprung from the earth. It was fresh and pure, a treasure that nature had entrusted to his care. He understood, even more deeply, why he couldn't allow Palmer to get his hands on that resource. When he returned to the cabin, he found an envelope attached to the door. Inside was an official notification informing that his property was being assessed for possible expropriation for public interest. The justification was vague, mentioning regional development projects. James felt his blood boil. It was Palmer's new tactic, to use his political connections to legally take what he couldn't buy. He immediately called Dr. Roberts, using the telecommunications service for the deaf. The lawyer promised to verify the legality of the notification and advised James not to sign anything. That same afternoon, while James was repairing the fence that had been cut, he noticed an unfamiliar car approaching. It was an official vehicle from the city hall. 2 men got out, one of them carrying a folder. "Mr. Anderson?" asked the taller one, approaching. "I'm Edward Miller from the Urban Development Department. We've come to check your property." James made a gesture indicating his deafness. The man looked uncomfortable, but continued speaking, now more slowly. "We have orders to evaluate this area for a municipal project. I need you to sign authorizing our entry." James crossed his arms, refusing to take the extended paper. Duke, sensing the tension, positioned himself next to his owner, the hair on his neck bristling. "Mr. Anderson, this is a standard procedure," insisted the man, his patience clearly running out. "If you don't cooperate, we'll have to take more severe measures." James remained impassive. He knew that without a court order they couldn't enter his property. After a few moments of impasse, the men returned to the car, visibly irritated. That night, James received an unexpected visit. Sarah appeared, accompanied by a man he didn't know. "This is Brian Mitchell," signed Sarah. "He works for Palmer, but he wants to help us." James observed the man with distrust. Brian seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact. "Why would you help us?" James asked directly. Brian finally looked into James's eyes. Sarah translated his words. "Because I know what Palmer is planning, and I can't be part of it anymore." If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. Duke didn't take his eyes off Brian, as if assessing every movement of the newcomer. James invited them in, still cautious, but willing to hear what Palmer's employee had to say. They sat in the simple living room, illuminated only by an old desk lamp. "I've worked as Palmer's personal assistant for 3 years, began Brian, while Sarah translated into sign language. "At first, I admired his business vision. Thought he was really interested in the region's development." Brian paused, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. Everything changed when the water project started. Palmer discovered, through confidential geological studies, that this region houses one of the largest and purest aquifers in the country. James nodded. He had already suspected this. "His plan isn't just to bottle mineral water," continued Brian. "He intends to control the water supply for the entire region in the coming years." Sarah translated quickly, her agile fingers conveying the gravity of the information. James's eyes widened at the revelation. "What do you mean, control the supply?" asked James in signs. "The climate models Palmer commissioned indicate a trend of prolonged droughts for the coming years, while surface reservoirs and common wells dry up. Whoever controls access to the main aquifer will have power over the entire water distribution." The magnitude of the plan was finally revealed. It wasn't just a lucrative bottled water business, it was a calculated strategy to monopolize a resource essential to life. "Why are you telling us this now?" questioned James, still distrustful. Brian lowered his gaze, visibly uncomfortable. "Yesterday I overheard a conversation between Palmer and the mayor. They were discussing ways to speed up the process of acquiring your land. They mentioned that accidents happen. That's... When I realized I couldn't be part of it anymore." James exchanged a significant look with Sarah. The threat was now explicit. "Do you have evidence of these conversations? Something we can use to report him?" asked James. Brian shook his head, but then hesitated. "I don't have recordings, but I have access to the project documents. Maps, studies, projections, everything that proves Palmer's true intentions. I can get copies, but it would be risky," Sarah intervened, speaking and signing simultaneously so both could understand. "Brian, we need that evidence. Without it, it's James's word against one of the most powerful men in the region." Brian seemed to ponder for a moment, the internal conflict evident in his expression. I'll try, but I need a few days, and if Palmer suspects, my career is over. It's not just your career at stake, signed James firmly, his eyes fixed on Brian. It's the life of an entire community. After Brian left, promising to return with the documents, James and Sarah discussed the next steps. The revelation about Palmer's plan changed everything. It was no longer just a matter of protecting James's property. It was preventing a scheme that would affect the entire region. "We need to tell Dr. Roberts," said Sarah, signing simultaneously. "And maybe it's time to involve the regional press." James agreed, but warned about the need for caution. Without concrete evidence, it would be their word against Palmer's, who had enough money to silence any accusation. In the following days, James redoubled vigilance on his property. Duke became even more attentive, reacting to the slightest noise or suspicious movement. Sarah visited daily, bringing news from town and advances from the resistance group that was silently growing. On the fourth night after Brian's visit, James woke up to Duke barking furiously. Someone was on the property. Taking a flashlight, James cautiously went out through the back door, with Duke by his side. The moonlight revealed a staggering figure approaching the house. It was Brian, and he appeared injured. James ran to him, supporting him before he fell. There was blood on his shirt. Inside the house, with Sarah's help, whom James called on his cell phone, they treated Brian's injuries, several cuts, and bruises, the result of an apparent assault. "Palmer found out," said Brian with difficulty while Sarah translated. "He found the documents I was separating. I couldn't bring anything with me." James felt his heart sink. His main hope of proving Palmer's intentions had disappeared. "But I didn't come completely empty-handed," continued Brian, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "I managed to download some files before being discovered. It's not everything, but there should be enough information." Sarah connected the USB drive to James's laptop. The three gathered around the screen, examining the documents. There were detailed maps of the aquifer, reports on the exceptional quality of the water, and profit projections based on regional supply control. One document in particular caught their attention, an email from Palmer to the mayor, discussing the possibility of circumventing environmental laws to allow intensive exploitation of the aquifer. "This is pure dynamite," said Sarah, her eyes shining with a mixture of shock and hope. "With this, we can not only stop Palmer, but potentially prosecute him." Brian, still visibly shaken, agreed. "He knows I fled with information. He'll try to find me, and when he does..." James placed a comforting hand on Brian's shoulder. "You're not alone now," he signed, with Sarah translating. "We're all in this fight together." The sun was beginning to rise when the three finished reviewing all the documents. A plan was beginning to form. They needed to ensure that the information reached the competent authorities and the press before Palmer could act. But more importantly, they needed to protect Brian, now a key witness against one of the most powerful men in the region. James looked out the window, watching the first rays of sun illuminate his property. The battle had only just begun, and he knew the next few days would be decisive. But for the first time since it all began, he felt they had a real chance of winning. The news spread quickly through the small community, like ripples in a calm. Lake Palmer's plan to monopolize the aquifer reached the ears of more and more residents. In just a few days, the small group that had gathered in James's cabin had transformed into an organized movement, with dozens of people willing to fight against the powerful businessman. Dr. Roberts took legal leadership, meticulously analyzing the documents provided by Brian. Sarah coordinated communications and community actions, while Tyler used his environmental knowledge to assess the true impact of the intended exploitation. Brian remained hidden on James's property, recovering from his injuries and helping interpret the technical documents. The cabin, once a refuge of silence and isolation, now buzzed with activity and purpose. "We need to act quickly," warned Dr. Roberts during a meeting with the main group. "Palmer is certainly already moving his pieces to neutralize any threat." James nodded, carefully watching the lawyer's lips. Through Sarah, who interpreted, he suggested, "We should take this information directly to the state attorney's office. It's the only body with enough power to face someone like Palmer." "I agree," said Tyler, "but we also need public support. If we can get the community to mobilize en masse, it will be harder for local authorities to ignore the case. Mary, the grocery store owner, who had become a fervent ally, added, "My store is at your disposal. We can use it as a meeting point and information distribution center." The plan began to take shape, a two-front action. On one hand, the formal forwarding of complaints to the competent bodies. On the other, community mobilization through an awareness campaign. But Palmer wasn't inactive. The next morning, James found his mailbox broken and an anonymous note with just 2 words: "Final warning." Duke, always vigilant, began sleeping on the porch, his keen senses capturing any suspicious movement on the property. James reinforced the locks on doors and windows and installed motion-sensing lights around the cabin. 2 days later, Dr. Roberts returned from a trip to the state capitol, where he had gone to submit the complaint to the state attorney's office. His expression was grave when he met with the group at James's cabin. "I managed to file the complaint, but I discovered something worrying," he said. "Palmer is about to obtain an environmental license to begin exploiting the aquifer. He used his connections to speed up the process." The news fell like a bomb. If Palmer got the license before the complaint was analyzed, he could start the works and create an accomplished fact, much more difficult to reverse later. "How much time do we have?" asked James, his fingers moving quickly in signs. "A week at most," replied Dr. Roberts. "The public hearing to formalize the license is scheduled for next Friday." The group exchanged concerned looks. A week was very little time to mobilize. "Enough support." "We need something impactful," suggested Sarah. "Something that opens the community's eyes to what's really at stake." It was Brian who had the idea. Still with visible marks from the aggression suffered, he stood up with renewed determination. "What if we organized a visit to the spring?" he proposed. "Take people to see with their own eyes what Palmer wants to destroy." The suggestion was received with enthusiasm. The next day, James guided a group of 15 influential community members, including the local priests, teachers, and merchants, to the spring on his property. He observed the expressions of wonder as everyone contemplated the natural beauty of the place and tasted the crystalline water that emerged from the earth. "This water supplies our homes, irrigates our crops," explained Tyler to the group. "If Palmer implements his intensive exploitation project, the aquifer level will drop dramatically in a few years." The visit had the expected effect. The next day, a Sunday, the priest mentioned the issue during Mass, warning about the risks of the project for the entire community. In schools, teachers discussed the topic with their students, who in turn took the concern home. A wave of indignation began to spread, growing by the hour. On Tuesday, a meeting in the town's central square attracted more than 200 people. An impressive number for such a small community. James observed everything with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The mobilization was working, but would it be enough? And more importantly, how would Palmer react? The answer came on Wednesday. James woke up to Duke barking furiously. Rushing out, he discovered that his pickup had been vandalized during the night. The tires were punctured, and someone had broken the windows. Later that same day, Mary called in panic. Her grocery store had received a visit from health inspectors who found irregularities and threatened to close it. Other allies reported similar intimidations. Inspectors from different agencies suddenly appearing, finding non-existent problems, applying fines. It was Palmer's retaliation, using his influence to pressure James's supporters. But instead of intimidating, the businessman's desperate actions only strengthened the group's determination. On Thursday, the day before the public hearing, James received an unexpected phone call. It was a journalist from the Capitol, interested in covering the story. Someone, James suspected it was Dr. Roberts, had sent the documents leaked by Brian to the state press. "Can we meet today?" Asked the journalist through the telecommunications service for the deaf. "This is a story that needs to be told." James accepted immediately. Media visibility was exactly what they needed to pressure authorities to act. As he prepared for the meeting, James looked out the window and saw Duke in an alert posture. An unfamiliar car had stopped near the entrance to the property. Two men got out and began walking toward the cabin. By their build and posture, James recognized Palmer's security guards. The businessman had decided to elevate the level of intimidation, but this time James wasn't alone. With a quick gesture, he sent a message to the support group on his cell phone. "Need reinforcements at the property, now." The two men advanced along the dirt path leading to the cabin. Their steps were determined. Their hard gaze scanned the property with the coldness of predators assessing the territory. Duke maintained a defensive position, growling low, the hair on his neck bristling. James knew he didn't have much time. He needed to gain a few minutes until reinforcements arrived. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the porch. Duke immediately positioned himself at his side, vigilant. The men stopped a few meters away, their posture making it evident they weren't there for a friendly conversation. "Mr. Anderson," said the taller one, a burly man with a scar on his face. "Mr. Palmer sent a message." James made a gesture, pointing to his ears and then to his mouth, indicating his condition. The men exchanged glances, momentarily destabilized by the unforeseen situation. "He said this is your last chance," continued the man, speaking louder and slower, as if volume could make James hear. "Sign the sale papers or things will get ugly. For you." James remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the men. Duke took a step forward, the growling intensifying. The second man, younger and nervous, put his hand in the inner pocket of his coat. It was at that moment that the sound of engines broke the tense silence. 3 vehicles entered the property almost simultaneously. Tyler's pickup, Sarah's car, and a van, from which several members of the support group emerged, including Old Joe and some local farmers. Palmer's men took a step back, clearly surprised by the sudden arrival of so many people. Their intimidation plans depended on James's isolation. "Any problem?" "Here?" asked Tyler, positioning himself next to James. "We're just delivering a message," replied the scarred man, trying to maintain his composure. "A private matter between Mr. Palmer and Mr. Anderson." Sarah approached, quickly signing to James what was being said. James responded in signs, his hands moving with intensity. "James says there's nothing private about this situation," translated Sarah, her voice firm. "Palmer wants to steal not just his land, but a resource that belongs to the entire community." The men backed up a bit more, now visibly uncomfortable with the growing number of witnesses. The younger one whispered something in his companion's ear, who reluctantly nodded. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, pointing an accusing finger at the group. "Mr. Palmer won't be at all pleased with this interference." "Tell Mr. Palmer," replied Dr. Roberts, who had just arrived, "that we'll all be present at the public hearing tomorrow and that we have very interesting documents to share with the authorities." The veiled threat in the lawyer's voice didn't go unnoticed. The men cast a final hostile look at the group before returning to the car and departing at high speed. The relief was momentary. Everyone knew that confrontation represented just the beginning of a bigger battle that would occur the next day. They gathered in James's living room to finalize preparations. "The journalist is already on her way," informed Dr. Roberts. "I managed to convince not only her but a regional TV news team. The more exposure, the better." James nodded, grateful for the unexpected help. Brian, who was observing everything from a corner, seemed anxious. "Palmer will look for me at the hearing," he said. "He knows I'm the source of the leaked documents. If he sees me there—" "Don't worry," reassured Sarah. "We'll all be together. He can't do anything against you in public." When the journalist and TV crew arrived, James took them to the spring. With Sarah as an interpreter, he explained the situation in detail. The aquifer, Palmer's proposal, the environmental implications, the intimidations. The reporter photographed everything, made extensive notes and interviewed several members of the group. "This will go on tonight's news," she guaranteed as she said goodbye, "and we'll be covering the hearing tomorrow." That night, James had difficulty sleeping. The tension of the last few days finally took its toll. Sitting on the porch under the stars, with Duke lying at his feet, he contemplated everything that had happened. His quiet, solitary life had been completely transformed. He thought about his former employer, Richard Palmer. How could two people be so different? One was deaf to sounds but heard perfectly the needs of the land and community. The other could hear, but was deaf to everything that didn't involve power and profit. The next morning, the cabin became the meeting point. Dozens of people appeared to accompany James to the public hearing. The atmosphere was one of collective determination. It was no longer just one man's fight to protect his land. It was the entire community defending its right to an essential resource. The room where the hearing would take place was already crowded when they arrived. James immediately noticed Palmer's presence, seated in the first row next to the mayor, and other local representatives. Their gazes met for a moment, and James noticed something he had never seen in the businessman's eyes: uncertainty. The presence of TV cameras and journalists was intimidating for someone accustomed to operating in the shadows. Palmer whispered something to the mayor, who shook his head in response, looking equally uncomfortable. The hearing formally began with the Secretary of Environment presenting Palmer's project in technical and bureaucratic terms, avoiding mentioning the real impact it would have on the region. Sarah, seated next to James, translated everything into sign language. When the time came for public manifestations, Dr. Roberts was the first to speak. With eloquence, he presented the arguments against the project, highlighting its legal and environmental irregularities. Then Tyler detailed the predicted impacts on the aquifer and the consequences for the entire region. Palmer, visibly irritated, stood up to counter. His words were carefully chosen, presenting the project as an opportunity for economic development for the region. He spoke about job creation, infrastructure investments, progress. But then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Brian, gathering. All his courage stood up. His voice trembled slightly, but his words were clear. "My name is Brian Mitchell. Until a week ago I worked directly with Mr. Palmer, and I can confirm that everything said here about his true intentions is absolutely true." A murmur took over the room. Palmer stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. "This man is lying," he shouted, pointing at Brian. "He was fired for theft and is trying to get revenge." It was then that James stood up. Silence gradually returned to the room as everyone watched the deaf man walk to the center. With Sarah by his side as an interpreter, he began to sign. His hands danced in the air, telling his story, the story of the land, of the aquifer, of the threats. He spoke not only with his hands, but with his whole body, with his eyes, with his soul. It was a powerful testimony from a man who, even unable to hear, had listened to the call of the land much better than anyone. When James finished his testimony, a respectful silence enveloped the room. Even those who had come prepared to support. Palmer seemed touched by the words of this man who ironically lived in silence. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, had translated each sign with the exact emotion that James conveyed. The mayor, visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat before speaking. "I thank everyone for their manifestations. Given the information presented, the City Hall needs to reassess the environmental license request. The decision will be postponed until we can fully investigate the allegations made here today." Palmer rose furiously, approaching the microphone. "This is absurd," he protested. "We're talking about development, about progress. We can't let a small group of radical environmentalists and a man who can't even hear delay a vital project for the region." His words, laden with desperation and prejudice, provoked murmurs of disapproval in the audience. James observed calmly, realizing that Palmer was losing control, and with it, revealing his true nature. It was then that Mary, the grocery store owner, stood up. Her voice, normally soft, echoed firmly through the room. "How dare you speak that way about Mr. Anderson? He may not hear with his ears, but he listens with his heart to something that you, with all your wealth, will never understand: the value of the land, the value of community." Spontaneous applause erupted throughout the room. One by one, local residents stood up to speak, sharing stories about how James had silently helped the community over the years, fixing fences for elderly neighbors, rescuing lost animals, offering products from his garden to needy families. The man whom many considered a solitary eccentric was, in reality, a silent pillar of the community. Palmer, realizing he was losing ground, tried one last card. "You're being manipulated. This project will bring prosperity to everyone. Jobs, infrastructure, economic growth. What can this man offer besides an unproductive piece of land? It was then that Tyler projected on the screen the documents obtained by Brian. Graphs, projections, emails, everything exposed for everyone to see. Palmer's true intentions were there in black and white: the intensive exploitation of the aquifer, the control of regional supply, the astronomical profits predicted while the wells of neighboring properties would gradually dry up. Palmer's face paled. His eyes frantically searched for Brian among the crowd, finally finding him next to James. The young former assistant sustained the gaze of his old boss, refusing to look away or show fear. This is intellectual property theft," stammered Palmer. "These documents were obtained illegally. I'll sue all of you." "The courts will decide on that," intervened Dr. Roberts calmly, "just as the state attorney's office will decide on your attempts to bribe public officials and the threats made to Mr. Anderson and other community members." The regional TV cameras captured every moment. The journalist whom James had received the day before made frantic notes. What should have been a simple bureaucratic formality had transformed into an event that would certainly be headline news the next day. The mayor, realizing the dimension of the scandal forming, made a quick decision. This hearing is suspended. The environmental license is officially denied until all these allegations are properly investigated. Palmer hastily left the room, pushing journalists and ignoring questions. His empire, built on influence and intimidation, was beginning to crumble in the face of the unexpected resistance of a man whom many had underestimated because of his deafness. When James left the building, a small crowd awaited him. People approached to shake his hand, thank him, show support. Duke, always by his side, seemed to understand the change. His bearing remained protective, but his eyes expressed the same calm joy that was beginning to sprout in his owner's heart. In Dice. The following weeks, the story gained national dimension. Journalists frequently visited James's cabin, interested in knowing the man who had challenged a powerful businessman to protect a vital natural resource. Experts confirmed the importance of the aquifer and the danger that its uncontrolled exploitation would represent. The state attorney's office opened investigations into Palmer's activities, resulting in the temporary freezing of several of his projects. Local politicians who had supported the businessman began to distance themselves, fearing association with the growing scandal. 2 months after the hearing, on a quiet autumn afternoon, James received an unexpected visit. An official car stopped near the cabin, and from it descended an elegant woman whom James recognized from the news reports. She was the State Secretary of Water Resources. With Sarah as an interpreter, the secretary explained the reason for her visit. The state government had decided to create an environmental protection area encompassing the aquifer and the surrounding lands. James's property would be the heart of this reserve. "We would like you to continue living here," she explained. "Your presence has been the best protection this land could have, but now the state will ensure that no one can exploit the aquifer in a predatory manner." The proposal included a modest compensation for the restriction of land use and the offer of a position as official guardian of the reserve. James smiled, accepting with a nod. It wasn't the money that mattered, but the guarantee that the water would remain pure and accessible to all. On a Sunday afternoon, when the sun painted the horizon with shades of orange and red, James organized a small celebration on his property. The cabin, once a solitary refuge, was filled with people: Sarah, Brian, Dr. Roberts, Tyler, Mary, Old Joe, and so many others who had united in the fight against Palmer. Together, they walked to the spring. The water emerged crystalline from the earth, following its natural course through the small stream. Duke ran ahead, guiding the group, as if he perfectly understood the importance of that moment. James observed everything with his heart overflowing with gratitude. The silence that had accompanied him throughout his life had never truly been isolation. It was just a different way of listening to the world. And now that world was expanding, enriched by new friendships, by a strengthened community, by a greater cause that had united such different people. When the sun finally set, everyone remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the simple beauty of nature they had fought to protect. No words were necessary. In the eyes of each one, James could read the same understanding that guided his own life, that some things, like land, water, friendship, are too precious to be sold, and that sometimes the deepest understandings emerge from the most absolute silence. Duke approached James, resting his head in his hand. Man and dog, faithful guardians of a treasure that now officially belonged to everyone, contemplated the horizon where a new moon was beginning to rise. One cycle had ended, and another, even more promising, was just beginning. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from.